This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Get what you want from Target today with same-day delivery. We bring it to your front door so you can do more of what you love. Want more nap time? We'll bring the diapers and wipes. Want more greatness for your game night? We'll bring the snacks and the cards. Want more time around the table? We'll bring that missing ingredient. And maybe some dessert too. You order, we shop, you keep doing your thing. Try Target same-day delivery. Shopped by Shipt. Restrictions may apply.
The following program, To the Left, is sponsored by To the Left Media, LLC, and to the extent applicable, their guests. The views and opinions expressed therein do not necessarily reflect those of NewsWeb Radio Company or its management.
You're listening to WCPT's To the Left with Samina and Shauna. Here's our hosts, Samina Mustafa and Sharonda, not Dawson. Sorry.
Here we are. We're back. This is Samina. You're listening to the Left with Samina and Shauna. And this week, we have a guest that we had before, Sharonda, not Dawson.
Hello, everyone.
Who's back as a guest host. Welcome, Sharonda.
I kind of feel like it's a homecoming to come back to the left.
Oh, no. You know what? Jay-Z's lawyers are listening. We can't do that. We can't do that. So for those of you who have never listened to the show, we are I'd say a female-centered show, female-led, independent show, and we are going to focus today's show talking about Black women in politics, a topic that Sharonda has a lot of expertise on and has some great connections. And so we're really excited to host Latasha Brown of Black Voters Matter. Super excited to have her on later on the show. And we'll also be talking about some local women in politics, specifically Kim Foxx. We're going to have April Friendly on from the People's Lobby to talk about the sort of campaign against her and the response against her that really started to really heat up after the mayoral runoff. So lots to talk about. If you are a Facebook user, hopefully there's a live stream happening right now. Yes, it looks like it's happening. It's always our Facebook handle, our Twitter and Instagram are all at To the Left Radio. So you can find us there, and you should be able to watch this live on the WCPT 820 page, as well as ours at To the Left Radio. So with that, we are live, and there are a couple of things that happened this week. I guess it was another quiet week
in America.
I know. It's morning again in America. Haven't you heard? So Sharonda and I talked about a few things before we got on the air, and I know there's something I want to talk about, but Sharonda, is there something that's on your mind that you want to sort of chat about?
I am so excited to talk about Black women in politics. I can't even summarize just how much excitement I feel about talking about people coming after Kim Foxx and talking to Latasha. And Joe Biden is already polling 48% with Black women. Did you hear that? Like what? So anyways, yes, I am just overly excited to talk about politics and the role and power of Black women in particular.
Yeah, no, and I'm excited that you're here to do that. Now, we're going to really do a deep dive on that subject kind of a little bit later in the show, but there's always some shenanigans happening in the world before that. And unfortunately, one of them happened locally. You and I were talking about the incident, I think it was at Homewood Flossmoor High School.
Yes.
So for those of you who aren't from the Chicago area or maybe not as familiar with it, that's in the south suburbs. And it's at the high school. There were four students that posted videos in blackface.
In blackface, yes, on social media. I think they were going through a fast food restaurant, and the school administration didn't say what the expellment was or what the punishment was. And so there's a number of Black kids at the school who felt like they were being overly disciplined. and weren't being respected and listened at the school, and they had to walk out, and they faced way more difficult discipline than the actual 4 kids who were there in blackface.
So the kids who did the blackface are not getting disciplined at all, as far as
or they're not saying what the discipline is, some sort of privacy thing, which, whatever, it is a thing. I think it's important to have privacy for kids. But the bigger issue is that this happened at Homeward Flossmoor. There was someone in blackface at OPRF last year. There was, there's been a number of blackface incidents happening in the liberal Chicago North, and it shouldn't be happening. So, like, what's going on, and how are schools being, how are they enforcing zero tolerance against racism? And I don't think that that's happened yet.
Right.
And so what we're seeing is that a lot of the young people are actually taking the lead on this and saying, you know what? We're going to walk out. We're going to protest. We're going to call out this discrimination that we see in the schools and these double standards when it comes to, black kids that are too loud getting disciplined and expelled versus white kids that are wearing blackface and they're still coming to prom, and nothing's happening there.
Yeah, so the disparity in literally policing the kids, the black children and not the white children, and it's almost like, okay, well, you are being consistently racist, but it's just come on, let's try to make this a teachable moment.
And it's not. And, I wrote about this, and I called it, but with black kids, they call it the school to prison pipeline, right? And so they're saying, these schools are setting it up for kids to go into prison and set up this discipline policies that are, so punitive. And I think a lot of schools for white students are setting up a school to politics pipeline where there's no
school to power. Let's call it school to power.
School to power. I like that too. But there's no accountability, for their actions. It's just like, oops, right? And then, so if you're at school and you have kids that are racist, it's hard to punish them when you have, you have President Trump and you have all these elected officials that are being racist and nothing's happening to them. And so we're really seeing the effects of this national okayness with racism trickling down. And our young people are saying no more. We're going to call it out. We're going to protest. And, it's up to us to, I think, to change that.
Right. And I know with the run up into the election, and frankly, I mean, having gone to Chicago Public Schools and then I ended up going to actually a Catholic high school where I was, I faced discrimination all the time for not being Christian, Catholic, amongst, other things. But it was something that was constant. But I think there was a sort of like, oh, this is what it's like. Kids are just mean. Kids are cruel. And there was just sort of like, kids will be kids, boys will be boys. And there was no conversation because nobody else was on our side.
No one else was on our side. And Dr. Eve Ewing, are you familiar with her?
Yeah. Oh, she's terrific.
Oh, I love her. She just did a conversation at Northwestern talking about the trauma that happens to kids of color that are in college, people of color, particularly black students, and the racism and the microaggression, and really pushing for therapy and counseling around this issue, because I know you and we could probably go all on and on about all the stories of microaggressions in school, and you're told to just kind of suck it up, right? Like, this is just what it is. This is who white people are. This is how white people behave in America versus making white people accountable for what they're doing and saying, no, actually, the way that you're behaving is inappropriate. This is wrong. These are the boundaries. This is how you respect people. And so much of the onus is on people of color to kind of deal with oppression, right?
And then as soon as we say something, it's like, oh, but you're being so divisive.
They're showing the race card.
And tone policing, which is the term that's not everybody's familiar with, but it's essentially saying, I kind of hear what you're saying, but if you said it differently, it would be so much better.
Girl, that is the story of my life. or this is my favorite one. Like, well, if you want allies, you can't get allies by calling us racist. And I'm like, well, if you are anti-racist and you're going to stop fighting against racism because I didn't say it nicely enough, I don't think you were really all that committed to being against anti-racism. It's like, I would stand up for your civil rights and dignity, but your tone just totally threw me off.
I know.
So now,
or had you not told me that I was being racist, then I could have lived my whole life being as strongly anti-racist as I think I've been. It's like, no, you haven't.
It's 2019. I'm like, let's call it out, right? Like, if you're doing it, we can't spend any more energy like pampering to people's feelings, not when you have communities under attack. Like when we have kids that are having these school to prison pipelines, that are being overly disciplined, that aren't graduating, that aren't getting equal education opportunities, that are making less money. Like, I don't have time to deal with your feelings, Becky, right? Like right now, like I need you to toughen up and take this seriously and really get on board with stopping racism. And part of that has to do with calling it out, knowing what racism is, how you participate in it, and how others participate in it, and then really doing something to change it. I'm so sick of it being on people of color to do the hard work of changing it and educating and counseling and doing all of these things all at the same time. It's just not helpful.
And and that's what I think is, it's kind of tricky because on the one hand, I want to say, like, do you not realize the trauma that people who are facing discrimination, that they are accumulating over their lifetime? And it's almost like it's just this profound disregard for their humanity and my humanity. Like when I say something to someone and they're like, but I do this or like, and we'll talk about it later, but it's like, I don't care what you did 50 years ago. What are you doing today?
Yeah. Or some of that Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. But like, that's actually, I mean, we are going to talk about it with Latasha, but it's like, it's not even one person. It is everywhere. I can't think of a single organization that is so-called progressive that doesn't have this issue. I can't think of a single progressive.
I would go further and say a single person. Like, in order to be anti-racist, it takes a lot of work.
Right.
Because you're born into a system of white supremacy and told that you are special. And so in order for you to get past it, you have to have done some work. And so I'm always surprised when someone's like, I'm not a racist. Oh, well, show me how. What have you done? Because I have, and again, I think racism, we could talk about this in a different session, or is this idea of like racist is bad and not being racist is good. And so if I say that you're a racist, that means you're a bad person, which isn't really the case, really. It's just more like a spectrum. You're racist because you're in America in a system that's set up on white supremacy and setting up that white people are, a certain way and that people of color and black people are another way. This hasn't to do with your morality necessarily. Like you're not, the Klan, but it is a spectrum. And the chances are, unless you've done a lot of work, you are still like, you have these racial tendencies. And that's not just even for white people. I think for people of color, we have internalized racism.
Oh, absolutely.
Just like with, feminists, like we have some stuff we have to deal with on our own. But if we can't talk about it, if we can't say the word, it's like Voldemort. Like we can't say.
Oh, you got to get that Harry Potter reference. We got to be careful. I don't know. I don't know if they're going to come after us, the Harry Potter people.
I know. I'm missing it.
J.K. Rowling. I don't know.
Right? But it is. It's like that. It's like, don't say the word. You can't say the word. And it's like, no, I need to tell you when you are being racist. I need to say this action is racist. And you have to be okay enough to deal with that, right?
Well, it really begs a question. If you're going to get this upset because I'm pointing out racism, but not getting upset at the thing that precipitated it, like, the racist incident, the voter suppression or whatever, then you're never going to be someone who can fight those things because you're not getting mad enough at the things that are precipitating our concerns and what we're talking to you about. So,
and that's the reality. They're not. And so I'm like, 400 years of being nice and trying this kindness thing hasn't stopped racism. So let's try something else, right? Let's try.
And it's not being
calling it-
unkind.
Yeah.
It's being clear.
It's being in boundaries. And it's like saying, you know what? I'm not going to bend to this white fragility. There's a book by Dr. Robin
Robin DiAngelo.
Yes, and it's all about white fragility. And how they make it miserable for people of color to come and talk to them about it because everything hurts their feelings.
And she does, just for those folks who don't know who she is, she actually does this. She's a white woman who does this training. Like, that's her job. So she has people coming up to her and just like, she has people of color coming up to her and saying, thank you so much for doing this. And then white people coming in like, please, why are you doing this?
And she said she had to get therapy because it's miserable. People make you white people make you miserable when you talk to them about racism. Yeah. So anyways, I'm hoping that this is a start, and this is 2019, and we have so many wonderful, strong Black women that are elected officials and doing things that we can just start calling this crap out and moving forward.
Yeah.
No more name,
right.
the racism name that cannot be said. We're going to call it out, racism.
Well, I want to call something out that has a racist component, actually. So I was in D.C. this week doing some actions and talking to folks about Medicare for All. And I feel like that's one of those policies that everyone's like, I think more and more Democrats, especially the true Democratic base, which is progressive and majority women of color, people of color, see the opportunity to really create some equity in our health care. Because we don't really have a healthcare system. We have an insurance profit system, an insurance drug profit system. And
that's a great way of phrasing it. Yes.
I mean, it's not, we're not getting healthcare. There's so many people. I mean, I just literally on the way here this morning, I read something that something like 137 million are estimated to have some kind of healthcare financial insecurity. That's a staggering figure.
And comparing that to how much American taxpayers pay for health care.
Yeah.
To still have so many people not insured. Like, that's the one thing I'm like, even my Republican friends, and I'm like, this is just bad money management. Like, what?
Yeah.
So it's obviously like something deeper when we get into like, what does it mean? Why are people so upset about this idea of everyone having quality care? And then again, it's like racism.
That's certainly part of it, but it's also like this. I'd say like decades of thinking that government is bad. Right. So it's like I read something recently, and I wish I could remember who wrote it, but it was almost like, and it might have been a tweet. It's sort of like, the right has spent decades, sort of taking over government and destroying it and saying, look, government doesn't work. Let's privatize everything. So they hand all these contracts to insurance companies. The private prison system is a perfect example of that. Yes. Every single aspect of that has been privatized. So like, those are cases of like, oh, look, the government sector we've destroyed is not working. Let's go the private route. And then when that's not working, it's like, oh, but we don't want communism. It's like, but you destroyed essentially a system that was, the FDR, the LBJ, those systems that actually lifted people up.
Yeah.
And that to me is people listening to decades of Republican propaganda and not knowing the history of this. And even just like the stuff like, when you see quotes about like Lee Atwater, who was, really the architect of the Southern strategy, Republican strategist, who said, we're going to appeal to racism in the South, and that's going to be our approach. And frankly, the Democrats use a Southern strategy too.
Yeah, they do.
I mean, and we're going to hopefully talk about that with Latasha later, but we have to switch gears.
Okay.
And bring in a caller that we have from the People's Lobby. You've got April Friendly on the line. April, are you there? April, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, hello. April. It's Samina. I've got Sharonda here as well.
Hi,
welcome.
April.
Welcome to the Left.
Yes, thank you for having me on. I appreciate this.
Yeah, no, we're excited to have you on. And so for folks who aren't familiar with the People's Lobby and to talk a little bit about the work you do there, if you could just spend a few minutes on that to let us know what the People's Lobby is all about.
Sure, yeah. So the People's Lobby, we are a grassroots member-based organization that work on lobbying and legislation, issue campaigns that fight against this racist, classist, fight against racist and classist inequities. So we work on issue campaigns around mass liberation, so particularly bail reform. Also, we work on campaigns around a fair economy, like an actual economy that does work for the people and the planet first. We're also supporters of Medicare for All. So I appreciate that you all just highlighted that. We also had a delegation in D.C. This past week.
Yes. I was with some of your with some of your colleagues, your comrades as well.
Yes. So we do that work through grassroots lobbying and legislation. We work on electoral campaigns. So fighting to get progressive folks on the city council, even into the state senate's office. We endorsed and put boots on the ground most recently in 14 different wards around the city, working to get folks like Jeanette Taylor in office in the 20th Ward, also Andre Vasquez and Rosanna and Maria Haddon in office, so that we can fight like on all fronts this racist agenda that is really an affront and attacking, Black and brown communities and working class people across the city and the state, quite frankly. I mean, it's a national, you spoke on, 400 years of a class of folks being underserved and undermined systemically. So we do what we can here locally to fight back against that.
Yeah, no, thank you for your work. And the four that you mentioned, Jeanette, Rosanna, Andre, and Maria, were all guests on the show. And as Shauna would like to say, there's just, there's that kind of put everybody over the top is what we're hoping to say. But, no big deal. But getting to the matter at hand, our focus today's show is Black women in politics, and we're starting local. And for those of folks who aren't familiar, Kim Foxx is the Cook County State's Attorney. She was elected, I guess it was kind of like forgetting the years, in 2016, when following the sort of the cover up really of the Laquan McDonald shooting, which I think folks are a little more familiar with. He was a 16-year-old who was shot by Jason Van Dyke, a police officer, and really, Gary McCarthy resigned. Anita Alvarez was voted out and replaced by Kim Foxx. And the People's Lobby and Reclaim Chicago, your sister organization, did a lot to put boots on the ground to help her get elected. But can you talk a little bit about what's happening now and what you and a coalition of groups are doing about it?
Yes. So, how we see it right now is that the Fraternal Order of Police are really they're attacking Kim Foxx because she is really not in alignment with their Trump agenda, essentially. And she is a Black woman who is stirring up the state's attorney's office, how cases are being prosecuted, that culture is shifting to where folks are not being locked up just because they're Black and poor. So she's shifting that whole agenda that is really being where the Fraternal Order of Police are laying that foundation for racist policing practices, racist judicial practices, and had been running a game of racist, even prosecutorial practices. So Kim Foxx is absolutely somebody who is working for reform and to change that culture. And the Fraternal Order of Police are fighting back. And we, as like you said, a coalition of grassroots organizations, on the south side of the city, Soul, the north side of the city, a Just Harvest, to the CPAC, which is all over the city. We are coming together to just like fight back against this narrative that the Fraternal Order of Police is actually out there to serve and protect and create safe spaces in our community, because they absolutely are not. And we will continue to work with Kim Foxx to lift her up and support an agenda that actually brings forth like real reform and changes in our criminal justice system.
Yeah, and I think part of what sort of seemed to catalyze some of this resistance was the sort of the Jussie Smollett case. Like that sort of putatively was the trigger, as it were, for some of this. But it's like, it sounds like this may have been sort of brewing, and we just didn't hear about it until now.
Yeah.
Sharonda, did you want to chime in?
I was going to say, and this is one of these instances where the national becomes local. And after Obama, what we saw was a lot of really angry white men who felt like their power was being taken away. And I think that this is not an accident that this happens. Now we have Kim Foxx, we have Lori as mayor, we have Tony as cook. And the white men are afraid of losing their power. And so they're coming out aggressively against her. And it is, based on racism. So this idea of the Jussie case somehow being more important than Laquan McDonald or any other police action. I mean, it's absurd, right?
Yeah.
So it's like they subpoenaed her. And they have said nothing about the countless cases of police brutality and misconduct. I think the city of Chicago gives out $100 million a year. It's staggering.
Just in 2018.
Yeah, a year. $100 million a year.
In 2018, it was $113 million in 2018.
And so she's like, hey, why don't we save some money? Again, so we get into these like code words where people will say, well, this is about justice. Well, no, why wasn't it about Laquan McDonald justice? Or this is about money. Well, then why isn't it about the $100 million that you guys are setting up? And I think what it is about, white men feeling like they're losing power and control, and they want to take down women, right? Like we understand this as feminists, right? We can say they don't like having women bosses. But when you add that intersectionality of a black woman coming in, saying, no, we're going to, change the misdemeanor from 500 to 1,000. We're going to stop with marijuana,
Yeah. So those are all the issues that April, your coalition has been working on. And I know there's an action coming up. If you want to we have about, 10 seconds left if you want to chime in about that.
Yes. So tomorrow, Monday, 4 p.m., we are lodging an action to really call out the FLP's racist agenda and to push back on their narrative. 4 p.m. at Union Park. 1501 Randolph, I believe is the address. Yes. 4 p.m. We're meeting there, and we are going to take the street. And we invite anyone and everyone to join us.
Okay, great. We'll link. I think I saw the Facebook invite. I'll put that in the comments of our live stream. So thank you, April. Thank you for your work and for your advocacy. We appreciate it, and we'll do what we can to direct folks to that action. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, we are going to take a quick break, and then we're coming back with Latasha Brown of Black Voters Matter. Super excited to have her. You're listening to the Left. Guest host Sharonda Knott Dawson. I'm Samina Mustafa. We'll be right back. I'm Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
We're producing a show on WCPT Sundays at 1 o'clock.
What should we call it?
How about Smash the Patriarchy?
I like it, but that's a lot of pressure. What about left-leaning ladies?
What about woman-splaining?
Yeah, but what about when we have guys on? What about Madigan's worst nightmare?
It gets enough attention.
I got it. To the left.
I like that. That could work.
Tune in to the left with Samina and Shauna on WCPT 820, Sundays at 1.
We are back. Lady B giving me the thumbs up. That is the validation I needed today on a Sunday. She is cracking up. Lady B is laughing and laughing at me, which means all is well with the world. Thank you, Lady B. That is our fearless producer, always keeping us on our toes. My name is Samina Mustafa. You're listening to the Left. This week, we have a special guest host, Sharonda Knott Dawson.
Hello.
We need like a da-da, da-da. We need a da-da sound. We can't. We will, we do not have the rights to do that stuff, Sharonda. You can't. Don't get us in trouble. Okay. There we go. That's what we can do. We can do that. Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Lady B. You did it. That's what we can do. We can't do the other stuff. But we are focusing on Black women in politics on this show, and we're really excited and honored to have a co-founder of Black Voters Matter, LaTosha Brown. And so we'd like to welcome LaTosha to the show.
Good afternoon. And of course, I think that Sharonda needs many hand claps.
She does.
So
she
much,
does.
LaTosha.
This is
sweet.
The love. I feel the love. That's so sweet. So, LaTosha, we are giving you all the claps today.
Exactly.
Which is why we've got you on the line. Can you tell folks a little bit about your work and Black Voters Matter? Okay. And then we can sort of get into it with some of the other topics that we've got on the lined up today.
I sure can. So I am a social justice and civic and a power building activist. I'm a native of Alabama, in a little city called Selma, Alabama, and grew up in Alabama's Black Belt in the Deep South, and currently live in Atlanta. But for about 25 years, my work partner and I, Cliff Albright, have been doing power building work for Black people, and that was. I mean, we did everything from organizing around criminal justice reform to education reform to shutting down prisons to voting. I mean, we really, our life has been dedicated to how do we build and consume with this question, how do we build independent power, political power for our community. And so I like to say, while we founded Black Voters Matter in 2016, the idea and kind of the work we started the work years earlier. Of 2016, we just kind of crystallized what we were doing and brought everything together and decided, hey, we need to start an organization that's really dedicated to building political power, independent political power for Black communities. And because traditionally what winds up happening, it's either the political parties or their political candidates, and they create the infrastructure, but there's a need for the community have its own infrastructure to really be able to engage in this political process. And so we started Black Voters Matter in 2016. We worked with communities. We started intentionally. We didn't go where it was sexy. We didn't go where white funders told us to go. We went where we thought there was a need. So we started in the South. And some of the key races that we started with was actually in Alabama. One of our first big races was in Alabama around the U.S. Senate election concerning Roy Moore and Doug Jones. And people may know that Roy Moore is this accused pedophile who and just a conservative nut who was running for this open U.S. Senate seat that Jeff Sessions had left open because he was appointed to Attorney General by Trump. And so, and that seat had been held by a Republican for over 20 years. And so as a result, there was that seat actually was flipped, and primarily because of the work of black women, black voters, but the work of black women. And so since that time, we've done work throughout the South in 7 states. We do a lot of work. Some of the things that we do, we're organized, and we do straight up what I call hand-to-hand combat. Communities, we talk about power. We invest in grassroots groups because we think that the way you build power is making sure that you're connected with the grassroots. We raise money and distribute money. We supported we raised the money and funded 120 groups, black-led grassroots groups last year. We organized and ran campaigns in 7 different states. We did a lot of work. We got the biggest, most wonderful, blackest bus in America.
The bus is amazing.
All throughout the Deep South to really send a different message and shift the narrative about the power and the potential of black voters. So that's just a little of the work that we've done.
Latasha's like, no big deal. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So you said a couple of things that I want to touch on, and trying to feel free to chime in here. But you said we didn't go where the white funders wanted us to go. And
yes.
So, can you, please expand on that?
It's interesting the way that in this political process, I love to say, there's these 3 kind of pieces of way that, like these white foundations and white funders, like see black folks. One, I always say, it's the round the Negroes up approach. Like there's really no interest in actually helping communities really build power or really engage in this process so that they actually can build power for themselves. But oftentimes what you'll see is 2 weeks out or 3 weeks out from the election, somebody, a fairy godmother, or godfather will come sprinkle a little fairy dust of resources in communities, and the only thing that you're supposed to do is go round the Negroes up and get them to vote. It doesn't matter if the candidate is bad, doesn't matter around the conversation it is. That's all you do, round the Negroes up, right? And so we completely reject that notion because, one, participation in itself does not lead to power. We know that. And then secondly, it does not build power communities. We know that transformative change is not just about voting, but it's really when communities are engaged and being self-determined and make decisions about their own destiny. The second thing is oftentimes there's this idea of what I call this other myth, which is a wrong approach, which is called trickle-down politics, that somehow someone has created this idea that just like trickle-down economics, if you just get people at the top just get money, then it'll trickle down to the bottom. Just like that doesn't work, trickle-down politics does not work. That if you just start and focus on putting resources all in TV and airtime and never necessarily connect with folks on the ground, that ultimately what you're going to see is growing apathy because you're not really touching and connecting with the people on the ground. And then the third notion that I'll just raise that I think people have to really examine, this idea of now is really bad. And that's a whole, and we can talk about this, but the great white savior, that somehow there's going to be this white man and this white male voter that's going to save us all, and it's the Democrats to just get him back. He hadn't shown up for 25 years, but somehow, this idea that if you can get that voter, you can win when you've got all of this potential and possibility with people of color and women voters who consistently vote for a progressive agenda. And so for us, that's where we start. We start with engaging those folks. And so not picking where was sexy means a whole lot of things. One, it meant we didn't go into places where there was just money or where there was just national attention. Matter of fact, a lot of our work was in rural America and in the rural South. And there's this idea, if you listen to TV and the radio, you would think that the only people that live in rural America are white men that wear Make America Great hats. And that is not the case. There are pockets of progressive voters throughout this country in rural and suburban communities. Some of them have been pushed out because of gentrification, but some of them, they're rooted in that's where they work in those communities. And we saw that And so that's why that we saw that, we know that because we're organizers. And so we plugged into and worked and saw the potential and the possibilities of pockets of progressive voters who are absolutely overlooked. And then the third thing is that oftentimes what I've been seeing, the civic engagement piece, is that it goes where the money is. Yeah. And so what that normally means is usually what you see is all of these operations that go in the big sexy states or the cities, where called, quote, battleground states. And I'm thinking myself, when you're in war, all the ground is battleground, right? And so where does it make sense as a strategy that where your enemy is gaining ground, that you concede that region? And right. I raise that because we talk about the South, and we're like, oh, yeah, that's the South. It's red and blue. No, the South is not red. It has not been invested. It's not organized. Yeah. And it needs to be continue to build its power. It's not red, and you can't concede it. Why can't you concede it? Not because you need to care about the South because, it's a great thing to do. No, everybody in America needs to care about the South because the South is driving national policy. The head of the Health and Human Services that Trump picked, who was that? He was from the South. He was from Georgia. The Attorney General, where did he come from? He came from Alabama. The UN ambassador, where did she come from? Yep. She came from South Carolina. I can go on and on and on to talk about how there have been Southern elected Republicans who are literally in positions of power that are driving national policy in this country that all of us are dealing with. So part of our strategy is to go where we know that there's possibility and potential, and also go in the territory that others are either afraid, not courageous, whatever the case may be, will not go into, because we see that there's the most potential to transform the national political discourse and transform what happens in this country going forward.
Latasha, thank you for that. And I think one thing, again, just to stress is how big that win was in Alabama, right? And that was Black women, because white women voted for the pedophile.
Roy Moore,
right? Like, this was Black women organizing. This was you guys getting out there. And one of the things I know, we've been, together doing this work for a while, is that we understand that Black women voters are the most consistent bloc, right? And we're on the left, but we don't get any of the respect. And I juxtapose that to the Tea Party on the right. Right. They're at the far right, but they're going to set up the agenda, and the Republican Party is going to try to go to their furthest base. Right. But in our primary, they're not trying to talk about Black women issues. They're not trying to talk about mass incarceration. They're not talking about disparities in health care. And I'm wondering, with a field of so many candidates in the primary now, is this an opportunity for Black women and Black people to really organize and get some power around our issues, and to say, we want to hear you talk about mass incarceration. We want to hear you talk about school to prison pipeline. Or do you think it's just going to be more of the same?
No, you are absolutely right. The path to the White House for a Democrat is first, they got to stop and have tea with Black women. That's the bottom line. Mm-hmm. In a crowded field of Democratic candidates, the really who's going to determine who goes out first will be the primaries. What we do know is that Black voters overwhelmingly, our most powerful impact during a presidential election cycle is actually in the primary.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so when you have these strict closed primaries in many of these states, that's why you had, if they know the history or they were around, they may recall that in 1984 and 1988, when Reverend Jesse Jackson was running for president, he actually won the South. Mm-hmm. He won South Carolina, Alabama, Florida, all of those places. The reason is because we overwhelmingly controlled the primaries. That's when our vote has the most weight in a presidential election cycle. But I think that is one of the mistakes oftentimes that the Democratic Party has made, which is why we do the work that we're doing. We always say that our work is not about elections, why we don't call ourselves a civic engagement group. Mm-hmm. We call ourselves a power building group, is that a power building organization is you got to do work ongoing, because right now everybody's running down to South Carolina
Everybody is down in South Carolina every week. Every week there was Kamala Harris, there was the Cory Booker. I mean, every other day there's somebody doing something in South Carolina. South Carolina has out of all of the states, has the least invested political infrastructure for black folks. Like when we were doing work in South Carolina about a year ago, we were going to groups that said they had never received any resources outside of a presidential election to really be able to work in their election. So, and just think about the logic of this. When you don't support and invest in folks building local power, all of a sudden you want them to run out for the presidential election, and then you talk about where you got low turnout. Well, you got low turnout because you have not really engaged and helped build the infrastructure. And so we see that in places like South Carolina that is important, is in play because of where it's positioned in the presidential primary. And so that's primarily going to be determined by black women. I think that we've got to also make sure that this narrative about black women, it ain't just about black women voters. It is also about black women who are leading these organizations. Right. We are doing the work. Yes. We're actually on the front lines of doing the work. We can go and look at the numbers in Georgia. All of this work that Stacey Abrams did to pull together and work this amazing campaign, this multicultural, intergenerational campaign, yet 73% of white women in that state voted for Brian Kemp. So ultimately, we've got to really be honest about, like, this, when we're talking about the women's movement, I do think something has happened with women, but we really got to recognize who's the cavalry, who's on the front line, has been the vanguard of progressive politics, and how are we investing in not just those women getting out to vote, but the leadership of women who are actually leading that work.
Right. Amen. And I just think, again, like we are taking the work, we're doing it, we're not getting the credit, we're not getting money for it. One specific question I had for you is, I hear it already. Like, we need someone who has electability against Trump, right? Like, we need to just stay focused on who has the most general appeal. Yeah. And oftentimes the most general appeal is going to be, the white men, right? Versus, and white men without necessarily having to talk about these issues. If we want to say, I want to hear from Bernie Sanders about his stands on guns and mass incarceration. I want to hear about Joe Biden and how he really feels about, what happened with Anita Hill. We're told that we're being divisive and we're going to split the party and that it's ultimately going to mess up our ability to win the general election if black women or black people speak up for things that are important to us. What do you say in response to that?
While I say that there is a distinction between the parties around the Republican and the Democratic Party, that structural racism is alive and well in both. And so what we do see that even on the Democratic side, we see that there is still a core group of people, primarily white men, who continue to want to run the party. That's why this whole idea of there's this white elusive voter, this white male voter that we can just get back, who has not shown up in over 20 years, right? That we can get that voter. And think about that. Like I was using the example earlier with someone, like think about, you got a basketball team, you got a first string of the best players that going to deliver. All you got to do is give them the ball, they're going to deliver, right? You got a third string that may show up to the game. You don't even know if they can even play, and oftentimes they don't deliver, right? Who would actually put the emphasis on the third string, i.e. the white voters, white male voters who have voted for Trump, instead of the voters who are on the front lines on the first string? It's ridiculous, a ridiculous strategy, but it's rated in racism and it's rated in structural racism. And I think even when you're listening to this idea of, this complaining about electability, what does that mean? Like, what does electability mean in 2020? Many people, the reason why Trump is in office right now, because of false narrative of who was electable and who wasn't. The idea, there were many that said that Trump could not win. He wasn't going to win because he wasn't an electable candidate. He didn't come out of the traditional Republican Party process. That all of these things, that he was just too crazy, he was too whatever, all those things. And what did that do in terms of yet he won.
Right.
So this whole idea, I'm raising that, and I'm raising that because I think it's really important for us to let that go. This whole idea of what is electability is who is elected is one. It is one definition of electability. Electability is who can get the most people out to vote for them. That's called electability, right? In the context of what that is, I think, particularly when we're talking about the left, that's going to require not just folks that stand that they're moving the moderate base. That narrative really only serves a couple of people who don't want to lose power, but really it's going to be the candidate that can move the base, but also the candidate that can excite voters who are either infrequent voters, millennial and zillennial voters, young voters, and really be able to build that kind of excitement to get people to have the kind of turnout we need. That's what it's going to take. And what we know is in this last election cycle, in the midterm election, Pew did a study that actually said that 63% of new voters, new and young voters who voted for the first time in the midterm election cycle said they did so because they were inspired and moved by a progressive candidate. Right. So the data does not support what they're saying. The history doesn't support what they're saying. So ultimately, I think we don't need to even give power to what they're saying. We've got to do what we need to do to really be able to hold folks accountable, and even young people. I want to offer, Harvard Institute of Politics actually did a study with their students, and usually Harvard students are kind of moderate and conservative. In their last, I thought was so interesting, this came out 2 weeks ago, that the majority of the students, the overwhelming majority of the students that they did the survey with, said that they were concerned. They had genuine concerns about the moral direction of this country, that their number one issue was around climate change, and that they were really interested in seeing progressive candidates that speak to their issues. So there's enough evidence, there's enough track record to say that he who wins is going, or he or she who wins, right,
or they, yes.
who wins this in the presidential election cycle, right? I think it's going to be the candidate that can actually build the deepest base of supporters across the spectrum. And I certainly believe that the magic pill is the the candidate that can excite those who are simply turned off in the process. Because we usually talk about, we're still using the kind of this metrics based on the people the super voters, right?
Right. And so folks who don't know that context, like what both parties do is they go after the voters who vote consistently and that they can reliably say are pulling a ballot for that party instead of going for lower propensity voters, just to give some folks some context.
That's right, and then the possibilities in that is that you almost know with super voters. Super voters, it's very rare that they switch. They're very predictable voters, right? You know where super voters are going to vote most of the time, right? But you got 45%, almost half of the country that are just sitting there. I call them ripe apples that literally could be moved, could be tapped into, and many of these communities that are simply the resources and the focus is not there. And so I think if we're able to put attention on not just moving the super voters, but what is going to get folks to really be able to move them to think about how critical this election is. And I think that what that is going to be is somebody's got to speak the language about what folks are concerned with, and I use my favorite theme song, that Janet Jackson, "What Have You Done For Me Lately?" That is what moves folks. They want to hear, what are you going to do for me to change the quality of my life?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one thing that Sharonda and I talked about before we got on air was even the forums like She the People, which happened in Houston. Was that just last week? I've lost track of the dates. But and hopefully, and I think there's a plan to do more like that. And essentially that's sort of a nationalized version of what you all are doing, which is reaching folks that people aren't talking to, right? It's putting it on television, but it's really taking your model and putting it on TV and getting Joy Reid and those folks involved. And we just need more of that. So how can our listeners help you keep doing your work? How can we help?
Thank you. So we are, or at least try to be, I call myself, we're active on social media, so people can follow us on Facebook. We have a page on Facebook. We also have a page on Twitter. That's Black Voters Matter Fund on Facebook, Black Voters MTR. I'm very active on Twitter and social media as well, and that's Ms. MSLATOSHA Brown, Miss Latasha Brown on Twitter. We have a website, Black Voters Matter Fund. There's like 3 ways. One, we build a base of supporters. Last election cycle, we had a group of 100 women all out in California that helped us to make phone calls and do text messaging, and so there's ways to get involved. Please contact us. Look us up, Black Voters Matter, Black Voters Matter Fund, and stay in contact with us. If not with us, I think what even helps the movement is you've got to have a political home. You can no longer be I'm just going to be an individual, because you're as an individual, that's like you're operating in a very, very in a narrow space around building political power. So you've got to join a political organization or support a political organization. So you can certainly write us a check. You should certainly volunteer with us. But more importantly, be in conversation with us as we're shifting this narrative and this dialogue of how important this next election cycle, and so that we're having real strong conversations that can move the political discourse of what's happening.
Yeah, no, and it's incredible, and we'll put links to your website in the comments and your Facebook page in the comments so folks can find it. And thank you for your work. I think people are sort of, the memory of all this news cycle is so constant that people forget, like, it is still incredibly exceptional that you flipped a Senate seat in Alabama. And we need to start putting more resources to that work. And thank you, Latasha Brown of Black Voters Matter. We really appreciate your time. We will continue to spread the word. And we really, hope there's opportunities for us to collaborate in the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on. Y'all have a great show.
Thanks so much. So that was amazing. And I'm like, okay, there's like 10 million things we should be doing. But we have exactly about like 90 seconds left of the show. Yeah, what an amazing show, Sharonda. Thank you for, 1 minute. There's Lady B telling us we have a minute. Okay, so that was, we had Latasha Brown of we're going to do a little thank yous. Latasha Brown of Black Voters Matter. We had April Friendly of the People's Lobby talking about Kim Foxx. They have their action tomorrow at 4 o'clock in Union Park, which is 1501 West Randolph. And so we're going to put that in the links too. And that's to support her against the attacks by the FOP. And of course, we have to thank Sharonda Knott Dawson, who came in and joined us today, had a blast. Lady B! Yay! Lady B, thank you, Lady B. We will be back next week. Shauna will be here. I will be back in 2 weeks. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good one.
Have a great day.